Hi, I have a unusual live stream slash podcast I'm going to do today about the Apple ecosystem. I had some rumors, kind of floating, or I heard some rumors floating about what potentially was going to happen, and basically what many people thought was going to happen did happen. So Apple has announced there's a partnership with OpenAI, and there's going to be some compatibility with the Apple ecosystem. So let me really talk about probably what many people's concerns are that are very technical, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the technical concerns that I have, and also talk about why it's kind of a bummer to leave Apple based on the fact that I've used Apple since I was a child. So I guess maybe start with the history here. So the first computer that I used when I was a small kid was Apple. Like even in elementary school, the Apple computers came out, and we were able to play with those. And I remember in junior high, we used Apple computers, and I got the program and logo. And so I've essentially always had an Apple computer of some kind in my household. And even when I went to college, I was an early adopter. I used a Mac. Everybody had a Windows computer in college. And so what's really strange for me, I think it's been, almost 40 years or so. I'm close to 50 that I've used a Mac. So this isn't really overreaction on my part. I've been in it for the long haul. I remember actually when Apple was like $9 or $10 a share. It was in dark days, and so there's been ups and downs with Apple, and I was stuck with Apple basically the whole time. So I think it's easy to take what I'm about to say and say, oh, you're just being overreacting, or you're jumping to conclusions here. I think if somebody's been with your company for basically their entire life, and they have some legitimate reasons because they have technical expertise, it's probably serious. And so I think that's maybe the first part that I'll talk about. Now, the next part I'll talk about is my background and why I'm qualified to talk about this particular subject. So currently I teach data science at many different universities, including Duke. I've taught at Northwestern, UC Berkeley, UC Davis at the graduate level. And in fact, some of the stuff that I do is focused on large language models. So I would say I definitely have expertise on how to use large language models. I've actually created two big programs on large language model operations. So I've done this for Coursera, I've done it for edX, and I've also done fine tuning on large language models, run them locally on the Mac, run them on Linux, run them on GPUs. So I understand what's happening with large language models. So let me talk a little bit about what's strange about what Apple's doing. So what's strange is that we've reached a point here where, in fact, OpenAI isn't even the best model. I mean, that's what's, I think, shocking to most people, is that currently there's a leaderboard that things are going back and forth, and there's no clear winner on the open large language model leaderboard. In fact, Anthropic has a lot of promise here. Open models like Mistral, Meta's Llama, lots of different models are appearing. So the strange part about Apple deciding to partner with OpenAI is there is no clear competitive advantage. In fact, it makes you wonder, why wouldn't Apple just take an open model or just copy some of the stuff that these open models have been doing and implement it on their hardware, which can actually do really good performance with local large language models. So I think that's kind of the head scratcher for people like me who are in the space, who have run local large language models. It's like, what are you doing? Like, why is it you couldn't figure this out? I mean, so I think that's part of the problem. Is there a cultural problem in Apple? Are there too much hierarchy? And I think sometimes what happens when a company has a charismatic leader like Steve Jobs, and it's gone through this incredible arc, and then a new leader comes on board, it's possible that they just don't have the ability to be innovative anymore. And so that's really what I think, from someone who's been a lifelong Apple user, around 40 years or so, or close to 40 years, however long you can be an Apple user in the mainstream. I've been it. And then as well, looking at the partnership with OpenAI, it really shows a lack of judgment. And so let me talk a little bit about the lack of judgment. So why would someone be concerned about partnering with OpenAI? So I think part of the issue is that Apple has really made a habit of saying that you're going to pay a premium, a price here for the Apple hardware. And as a result, you're our customer and we care about you. And in fact, we're going to really provide an amazing user experience for you. And so that's been the value proposition for Apple. It's a little bit like a Mercedes or a BMW or some kind of luxury brand. It's like, look, yeah, it's expensive, but Apple really cares about you as a customer. And so we're going to have privacy, and we care about your privacy. And they did this change with Apple recently where you could click a button and Meta wouldn't track you anymore. And so there's kind of been this whole history. And so what really causes a lot of questions to be raised is that if you look at the history of OpenAI and you look at, really who's in charge of OpenAI and what's the background here, it's a very different background than Apple. So let's talk a little bit about the leader of OpenAI, where the leader came from, kind of, some of the controversies. So if we look at the leader of OpenAI, Sam Altman, he originally was a Stanford dropout, and that's kind of cliche and also bad already. Like, you're 19, did you really learn any skills? Are you really an expert at writing software at 19? Probably not. Like, I'm a professor, right? I teach people all the time, and you have a lot to learn right at 19. You can be brilliant, but you have a lot to learn. So what happened was his startup actually wasn't a wild success, but he made friends with the founder of Y Combinator and then later took it over. And then while he was running Y Combinator, there's lots of stories about conflicts of interest. And so this is published widely in different newspapers. And so these conflicts of interest really made it look like there's a lot of Machiavellian behavior happening from this particular individual. Later, OpenAI board ejects Sam Altman. We also see there's lawsuits from New York Times, there's lawsuits from actors. Lots of people are looking at the fact that OpenAI is claiming that everything that's on the internet that they can touch is fair use. And so really it shows like a predatory behavior, both from the leader of OpenAI as an individual, but also it shows predatory behavior from the company. And so when you couple the fact that the majority of people that are using the Apple ecosystem are creators, right? I've worked in film. I have film credits on Avatar. I have film credits on lots of famous movies, and I've been in the film industry and TV industry for a long time. I know a lot of people. They all use Macs. They like doing creative stuff. And if you're essentially partnering with someone who has really demonstrated a lack of regard for your customers, like the Scarlett Johansson story is a pretty good example where they talked to Scarlett Johansson. She said no, and then they did something very similar. What we're seeing here is that really Apple is abandoning their core mission, which is to help creators be productive, to create a premium product. So I think that's what we're also seeing here is that it really is shocking to people that Apple would stoop down this low and basically really slap their customers in the face. So that's kind of the part of the issue. Now let's get a little bit into some of the technical details of why. I think I saw something recently from Musk where he talked about how he might ban Apple from being showing up at Tesla. Now, he's got a reputation for being very controversial, but that doesn't mean that he's not right sometimes. And so I think if we take Musk, for example, and some of the things he said, let's go ahead and focus on this for a second. So one of the things he said was if they're implementing an integration with ChatGPT or OpenAI at the OS level, essentially it shows two things. This is what he said. I'm paraphrasing. Is one, it shows they have lack of skill, which I would agree with is very scary that they're showing this lack of skill when many people in the open source community are running local large language models. Second, it shows that potentially that OpenAI could be lying to Apple and Apple's maybe trusting them, and they could potentially be doing lots of devious things. So we don't know. Like, for example, if you truly believe in fair use, for example, what if you have access to iCloud? Let's say somehow there's a way that they had access to iCloud and we have all these artists and they need more data. What's to stop them from basically taking everybody's iCloud accounts and then training on the iCloud accounts? I mean, that would be the gold mine, right? Is right now we're limited by data that's publicly available. But if you could get access to the authors, the creators, that, maybe Lord of the Rings producer Peter Jackson, who I used to work for, if you could get their data, imagine really how valuable that would be to OpenAI, especially if they think they've got the legal system under their control. Maybe they have a insight with Congress. They know the right congressman to talk to kind of make sure that things go their way. That's really the danger here, is that if they've already been able to kind of grease the wheels for the U.S. government and also figure out the laws, then if Apple is actually giving them access to this, and even if maybe later OpenAI kind of tricks them and they're able to get this data, that's really the problem. And so let's get a little bit into the technical of this reason. So I've heard that, oh, well, yeah, 99% of the model is run on the device. It's true, you can do some really cool stuff on the device, but they're talking about 99% of the data. But let's talk about the 1% for a second. 1% of those payloads potentially are going to go somewhere. So we don't know the technical details, but presumably they're going to go to a server somewhere. Now, there's two options. One is that the server could actually be something that Apple runs, like they could take OpenAI's model and then actually run it, and maybe they could claim that that's a way of protecting it. Or second, those payloads get really changed and they get depersonalized, and then that data goes into the OpenAI servers. But the real problem here is the trust factor. So if we look at the people that are involved in OpenAI, especially from a leadership perspective, and you really look at a pattern of something called regulatory entrepreneurship, that's what's really troubling. And so what is regulatory entrepreneurship? It's really the playbook for Y Combinator, which is the former company for Sam Altman. The regulatory entrepreneurship is find an area where things are kind of gray. They might be legal, they might be illegal, and then exploit it. So we see this with the illegal taxis, how they've been driven out of business by Uber. We see this with illegal hotels, with Airbnb, and we're also now probably seeing this with copyright. Is that OpenAI has been able to kind of steal all this data, claim it's fair use, and now again, really the problem is potentially with Apple. So I think there's a lot of danger here that people are not aware of, and there's some technical danger that we don't know about. So what's someone supposed to do about it? So now let's get into, like, okay, well, you're worried. What are you going to do about it? So I would say first step is that I think dipping your toes into Ubuntu would probably be the best step. And so in terms of companies, like what are the laptops you could actually buy? I think two of the better ones. One of them is Framework, which is something I just purchased a couple of days ago. I purchased two Ubuntu laptops. I think that's probably one of the better options. They also, I think it's called System 76 is another one. So I think if you're worried, maybe that's the first step, is you could actually start with your laptop, get a new Ubuntu laptop, start playing around with it, start getting your creative set going, start looking at what are some of the things you can do to kind of diversify away from Apple. It's going to be very, very difficult to move off of Apple. And again, not to scare you too much, but if you are somebody who has amazing creative work, I think you should be worried. I think you potentially should be worried about what happens to it. So I think Ubuntu laptop could be first. Now, the next thing is, if you have a watch, right, what could you do? Well, I think an easy thing to do is just get rid of it, right? Sell your watch, potentially get to a different kind of watch. I just got rid of my Apple Watch today, and I'm moving to a Garmin watch. So that's two things I got rid of. Now, the next thing I'm probably going to do, once I set up my my Ubuntu laptop and I get everything working, is I'm going to get some of the tools that I had previously working on Ubuntu. And once I've got that figured out, let's just say it takes me 30 days. Then what I'm going to do next is I'll take my Mac Studio and I'll sell my Mac Studio, and then I'll most likely buy an AMD Threadripper box, get that set up. So I'm just going to do it kind of one step at a time. And so my goal is not to go crazy and do everything at once, get every single person in my family off of it, but I am going to basically methodically remove myself from the Apple system. Now, if we take a look though at some of the benefits of this, one is that, if you're being charged a premium and you're basically getting a garbage product, then you're going to save a lot of money. So like essentially, if you're getting a used Ford Pinto with an exploding gas tank, but you're paying for a Mercedes, then the advantage here is that you're going to save a lot of money. So I think that's one of the benefits of leaving the Apple ecosystem, is that it may not actually be worth it long term. Now, the second thing is that in terms of your habits, right, is that there's a lot of research that shows that people are using iOS devices too much, or Android devices, or mobile phones. It might actually be time to think about, well, maybe I don't even need a mobile phone anymore, or could I use a different strategy? So could I switch to, let's say, a flip phone, right? And could I have a flip phone and maybe like a tablet, like maybe like a Linux tablet, where if I had to use some kind of an app, it's like a really big phone. So it's like I can do it, but it's kind of not something I would want to put in my pocket. And that's one of the strategies I'm thinking about. I don't have it all figured out, but that's one of the things I'm thinking about. And so one of the things that potentially could happen is that I would actually save a lot of time, right? So I could save a lot of time by not having to have my phone all the time and be addicted to it. And so I think it's easy to get upset about it and go, everything's horrible. But I think the benefit is that it's a good way to rethink what I'm even doing with technology. So like, really, a computer is just a tool. Like, it's like a screwdriver, or it's like a hammer, or it's like something else. And so, really, if I think of Ubuntu, then I start to think more like my computer is a tool, versus it's like something that identify with, or it like defines me as a person. And then second is that if I get off of the whole smartphone addiction cycle and I use it less and less, something I'd already been doing, that's actually good for me. So I think one of the ways to think about this is that there is a pathway. I mentioned a few of them, is kind of slowly switching to Ubuntu, and starting off piece by piece and changing it, getting rid of your Apple Watch, getting rid of iOS device, in the future, or even getting a flip phone at first, starting to experiment with it. And I think what really this could be is that we could have just reached the peak, right? So we may be at peak technology right now, and it is potentially a time to just reboot, right? And I think that's the happy part of the story, is that you can think about this disappointment with Apple as a great way to recapture your time, save money, and really revisit even what it is that you care about. And I would say one of the things that really is a problem right now in America is because of Citizens United, the companies can really lobby to Congress with an unlimited amount of money. And so in some sense, there is less of a democracy and more of an oligarchy, because these companies can kind of tip the scale about what they're doing. So I think maybe it's another thing to look at as well, is like, how much do American corporations actually control the democracy, and what are some things that we can do in the future? And that's really like a bipartisan issue to think about. So thought I would just give you some raw thoughts. Some people ask me about, like, what are my advice on how to switch off, and I think it's pretty good advice. I'll probably have some more in the future. Now, one of the things I am planning on doing is, one of the authors for Pragmatic AI Labs is actually hard at work right now, working on a story or a course on how artists can actually switch from Mac to Ubuntu. And they're really going to go step by step, and they're going to show you the hardware, and one of the advantages, in fact, of the Ubuntu framework laptop over Apple is you can't upgrade the components, right? It's all one piece. But with a framework laptop, you can actually pull the pieces out, put them back in. You have total control over it. It's repairable. It's better for the environment. So Apple has, unfortunately, kind of a fake environmental record, and there's lots of labor violations that we've heard about in the past as well. And so I think that could be one of the stories that I'm going to tell, and actually put some of this to good use, is really show an artist, hey, here's a platform that's not going to abuse you, steal all of your data, give it to some other company so they can profit off of it. And so I think that's another thing to look out for. I'll have more information about this soon. But thank you, all the people that paid attention, and happy to answer questions anytime. Feel free to reach out. You know how to get a hold of me. All right. Talk to everybody later.